Meine Damen und Herren, erstmal technischer Check. Diejenigen, die jetzt Sie müssten mich jetzt im Headset hören können. Diejenigen, die das benutzen. Ich hoffe, das funktioniert jetzt. Wichtige technische Ansage, jetzt für Deutsch wäre das die Taste 3. Für Englisch wäre das die Taste 4. Und wer jetzt ohne Headset mal es hören möchte, dann ohne Headset. So, also herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, bei der Veranstaltung von Freedom Finance. Danke nochmal, dass Sie alle Zeit gefunden haben, hier zu kommen. Ich darf eine wirklich sehr kurze Einleitungsrede halten, oder kurze paar Sätze. Und mit Ihrer Erlaubnis mache ich das auf dem Weg, dass ich eine kleine Hintergrundgeschichte erzähle. Also ich selber komme aus dem klassischen Investmentbanking, Sales and Trading, so die ganz klassische Palette, auch bei der Deutschen Bank und UniCredit und auch einige Emerging Markets Banken wie Renaissance Capital. Und als ich vor 10 Jahren Freedom Finance kennengelernt habe, muss ich ehrlich sagen, war ich super skeptisch. Also wie gesagt, mit diesem Background war mein Verständnis, wer braucht denn überhaupt noch einen Broker? Ja, es gibt genügend von denen, ja? Von Brokern, Investmentbanken und Finanzdienstleistern haufenweise. Also wahrscheinlich, und ich muss ganz ehrlich sagen, war ich durchaus gedacht, das Ganze wird nicht laufen. Und erst recht, als die Damen und Herren von Freedom sich aufgemacht haben, auch in Deutschland Fuß zu fassen, da dachte ich mir, naja, das funktioniert gar nicht. Ja? Jetzt, fast 12 Jahre später, jetzt insgesamt und ein paar Jahre später für Deutschland, muss ich ganz klar eingestehen, also ich lag total falsch, und zwar richtig total falsch. Denn man kann ganz klar sagen, dass Freedom Finance jetzt ohne falsche Bescheidenheit durchaus zu den wirklich globalen Leaders, was zumindest Zentralasien angeht und Osteuropa, was Finanzdienstleistungen inklusive Brokerage-Dienstleistungen angeht, gezählt werden kann. So, also das ist jetzt mein klares Verständnis. Jetzt kann man natürlich auch jetzt noch sagen, na gut, die hatten Glück, das waren die Märkte, das lief mal gut. Aber wir alle wissen, so funktioniert es in der Regel nicht. Es bedarf wirklich richtiger strategischer Entscheidungen und vor allem nicht nur eines gutes Management, sondern wirklich eines Top-Managements, um in dieser in die Situation, wo man so viel wirklich objektiv gesehen so viel Konkurrenz hat, eben halt nicht nur sich zu behaupten, sondern wirklich auch durchzustarten. Und auch ohne falsche Bescheidenheit kann man wirklich durchaus sagen, dass der Gründer von Freedom Finance, Timur Turlov, und der Visionär von Freedom Finance sicherlich, das Wort maßgeblich stimmt ja auch gar nicht, also grundlegend zu dieser Erfolgsgeschichte beigetragen hat. Und deswegen freuen wir uns, dass wir heute Timur in Berlin begrüßen können und der uns sicherlich jetzt wirklich ganz ausgiebig über Freedom Finance erzählen kann. So. Dankeschön. Danke.
Danke. Thank you so much. I will be in English. So, I think the only reason why do we need stockbrokers is to trade some investment opportunities, and we are not only the brokerage provider who can provide a DMA access through the modern mobile app, providing some kind of near brokerage approach to the US stock market, providing robust mobile application. But we also one of the biggest research house who is covering a lot of tech companies, a lot of US blue chips, a lot of IPOs, which is happening all over the world. And I think one of the reasons and one of our competitive advantages is our ability to provide our customers with interesting investment ideas, with interesting research. And today I will try to share our view, our company's view to the current situation on stock market. And we'll be happy to talk to you and to discuss these opportunities because market getting more and more wild each next year. It's becoming more volatile. So we're seeing the huge growth and very huge correction against growth. Sometimes stocks can double, triple, quadruple, and then lose three-fourths of its value. And all of things is happening very, very fast. So risk is everywhere. And the biggest risk is to stay away from the market. Because inflation is already here. And unfortunately, from my standpoint, one of the most risky assets this time is to keep long-term investment-grade government bonds. If you have a 20 years term, fixed coupon government bonds, any respectable country, like Germany, for example, the United States, United Kingdom, French, or something like this, the yield now on an extremely low level, even 10 years German government bonds is yielding almost zero. But inflation is already like 6 to 7% officially. And if the yields and interest rates will be higher on this level of inflation, to stop this inflation, central bank will have to raise interest rates sooner or later. And the interest rates should be much higher than zero or even minus 0.5, like it is now. If the interest rate in Eurozone will become like 5% per annum, at this moment we have inflation higher than 5%. In this case, in the next 10 years, you will lose 5% each year, next 10 years, comparable to the new bond, which will be issued with 5% coupon, comparable to 0% coupon like now. And that will mean that the current government bond, which you are buying now for zero interest rate, will be extremely discounted, like 40% from its face value. So its market price of this government bond will be like 60 cents per €1. And that's also a big risk, because the new bonds will trade it with different coupons. And it's much better to buy bonds with 5% coupon rather than 0% coupon. Of course, you will be able to get all the face value in the end of the day, but your purchasing power of this money will be much less for anyway. And you will lose a lot of opportunities. You will lose at least ability to buy a bond with 5% coupon and make some money on it. So I think it's a time where we have to risk, which we must risk to protect our wealth. But of course, we should not speculate. As one person told, the speculation is a very poor form of very poor form of investments. So we have to be sure. We have to do research. We have to better understand all the processes in economics to protect our wealth, at least to protect our wealth. And maybe if we will be happy enough, we will be able not only to protect our wealth from inflation, but also to make some money on it. If we could be able to run fast enough, we will be able to go forward. Maybe not such forward like we're expecting, but much better than anyone else will do. So let's start our overview. I think United States market is growing. It's one of the most fast-growing markets last, I think, 13 years since global financial crisis. US market performed better than most of the markets in the world. Better than emerging markets, better than Europe, better than almost everything, much better than China, for example, who also did a great progress over the last 10 years. But not only the price of the stocks is growing up, also corporate revenue is going up and corporate profits is also going up. Companies, each earning seasons, most of the companies is showing the better revenue per share, better net income per share. And by the tax reasons, corporations makes a lot of money, and paying dividends is not always a great idea, because most of investors in the United States reinvesting this money to the back to the instruments. Pension funds, institutional investors, most of them not actually need the cash, and when they're receiving dividends, they should put these dividends back to the market. But when they're receiving these dividends, they're paying taxes. Otherwise, if they don't like to have a cash payments, they have to pay taxes on it. And because of this tax reason, most of the companies don't paying dividends. They just buying back their stock. They're reducing the amount of shares outstanding, buying back some stock from the market. And because of that, the same amount of money which company is generating next year, it's because of this buyback, it's more dollars per share shareholders will get the next year, because it will be less amount of shares. For the same profits, it will be more per each outstanding shares if they will buy back some of them. And then Apple, for example, is buying back a lot of its stock each year, and they spending most of their profits to repay back to the shareholders, buying back their stock. If someone needs some cash, they can sell the stock. If you don't need this cash, you can just keep holding and not paying any taxes in this case. And that's a which is also driving the market capitalization. If you're buying back your stock each time, and the same way government is printing money fast enough, so amount of good stocks is reducing and the amount of money is extending. And it's more and more and more cash seeking for good shares each year, and it's less and less good shares available in the market. That's also one of the reasons why stock market is growing and will continue to grow. This year, this buyback window is opening, and corporation is already approved $1.2 trillion for buyback. 1.2 trillion. It's already, they already decided to do that. That's a public information. So their board of directors made decision to spend this money on buyback, and they will do it for sure. And it's a big amount of money, even for the United States, $1.2 trillion. This will support the market capitalization. And free liquidity in money markets funds is also extremely high. 5.5 trillion of US dollars, which is extremely huge amount of money. It's like 1/3 of total United States GDP. No, 1/4 of total United States GDP. It's a record maximum of free cash on in money markets funds, and that's also mean that this cash could be used for stock market transaction fast enough. So they can spend this money for buying stock any day. That's the money inside the brokerage industry in these money market funds. So this amount of liquidity which is seeking for the good shares is huge. 1.2 from corporations, which will be used for sure. An extra potential 5.5 trillion from investors from their pockets, which is also looking for some allocation. And they making no interest now because interest rate is also very small. And inflation in the United States is even higher than in European Union. It's officially 8%. 8%. It's never happened before. No, it's happened in 80s last time. It's happening time to time, but many tens of years we never seen such high level of inflation in developed world. That's also side effects of stimulus check in pandemic time. Sorry. Yeah. I think what can we see all the last time? Corporations, good corporations is continuing to make money. So they're not missing analyst expectation. Nasdaq now trading like 25% lower than a maximum in the end of last year. But most of corporations not performing worse than last year. Of course, at least some corporations been extremely overvalued since 2020. But that's a moment where you can be very selective, because some of them been hugely overvalued and they're trying to be revalued back to fair. But some of them, which is not being so hugely overvalued, is also extremely discounted. And that's especially the time when you can buy companies with strong financials for the very reasonable price. In some sectors, if you will be very selective, you can make great deals, especially now, because the level of fear in the market looks to be very high. So a lot of people, especially in tech industry in the United States, they have a big fear to buy. So the amount of bears in the market, amount of customers who is selling short, now at a high level. And that means in a moment where we have where it is more sellers than buyers, we always seeing the cheapest prices. When everyone is sure that further it will be even cheaper, it's usually the time of rebalancing, and usually it's a time when everything will be only more expensive, because everyone who been ready to sell already sold, and it's nothing more for sale. It looks like we close to this point, and if you will look for some if you will look for US money market funds, you will see that amount of cash in the system is just growing, and especially printing of money is supporting the growth. It's supporting the growth of the revenue of corporations. That's supporting growth of net profit. And that's supporting growth of the stock market. Regulators has a dream to reduce amounts of money a little bit. But this excess of 5.5 trillions is so huge that if it even will be halved, it's still too much. And in a moment, we can see the bear market, a long-term decline of stock indexes, only in a situation where cash is in deficit. If the cash in economics is in deficit, we can see long-term decline. If cash in the economics in such proficit, if it is so huge excess of cash almost everywhere, it's very difficult to imagine a long-term decline. You will never liquidate position if you don't have any other opportunities. Cash on an account is not yielding anything. It's not generating any yield. And if you will sell the stock, okay, well, what's the next? Even if you're owning the Apple is generating like 3% per annum of net profit to their shareholders and paying it back by buybacks, by dividends, by something like that. If you're just keeping this money on the account or on government bonds, you're making much less. And also, Apple revenue is protected from inflation because each new iPhone is expensive than before. So I remember that my first iPhone cost $499, and my last iPhone cost $1,300 in the last 12 years, 13 years. That means that to own strong stock is a better idea than to own just a cash this time. If we will see in the last time, let's start from this lower chart. This EPS is the earnings per share. It's how much money US corporations generate per share in index. And that's an average forward PE ratio. So the 10 means that the company generating enough of net profit to cover the market capitalization in 10 years. So we're seeing that company's earnings per share is growing, and it's growing faster than the price. So, and because of this multiple is declining, which means that market actually calming down. Sometimes market can correct because of strong decline in the price, but sometimes revenue just we can grow faster than revenue, and then revenue can grow faster than market. That's also a way how it could be rebalanced some way. And we're now seeing market is declining and the revenue is continuing to grow, which is helping each other in some way. Federal Reserve never hiked interest rate when in a bear market. If we will check the growth of indexes, we compare growth of the indexes with all cycles of hiking interest rates, we will always see that all the time when Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates, stock market continued to grow. That's not extremely, this correlation is kind of absurd because more expensive money always should calm down economics, and that should put some pressure to the stock market. But Fed Reserve never hiked a rate if this rate hike could be able to damage economic growth. That's the reason. They're trying to be reasonable. For sure, they don't like to have a recession. It's better to have inflation rather than economic decline. People should continue to trade. They should continue to produce goods. Inflation is a bad thing, but economics decline and recession is even worse, unfortunately. It's very painful when the price is growing, but it's much more painful when everyone is getting bankrupt and the cost of the money is growing up extremely fast. When the best strategy is just to sit on the cash pile, on some bag with some gold inside, and you every next month you can buy more and more on the same amount of cash. And everyone who is trying to do business, everyone who is trying to invest in manufacture, in trade, all of them losing money because the price is all the prices is going down. You buying some goods, you're driving it to the next city and it's cost less than you bought it because of the price decline. So that's the reason why interest rate is not yet high enough in Eurozone. 7% inflation, like here we have in the in Eurozone, is require interest rate like 8.5%. If we will just read the book, we should keep the interest rate. When inflation is growing up extremely fast, we should keep interest rate higher than inflation. But if European Central Bank will hike the rate to the point of 8% per annum, it will for sure produce as a huge economic decline and financial destabilization for the most financial system. It will hurt the mortgage market, housing market extremely fast and will create a huge damage. That's the reason why they can't do that. They should keep interest rate on negative level when inflation is already here. They can't act because the cost of reacting to that is even more. And that's how it works. Actually, they can't control inflation like it's wrote in a book, unfortunately, because each decision has its cost. And inflation is bad, but no one like to have an economics decline with extremely high rate of bankruptcy, extremely high rate of problems in the labor market. Nobody really likes that. No any government. So, and that's why that's why inflation will be longer and on bigger levels that everyone wants them to have. In theory and on practice also, I think the financial sector also has very interesting opportunities now. Maybe you read in the books that in a time of huge inflation, financial institution is making a lot of money. That's maybe one of the reasons why buying some ETFs exposed to financial sector could be a good idea, especially this moment. Bankers could be able to make more money on inflation rather than its customers. And when they have a negative interest rate, they're taking money from you and paying to the European Central Bank to keep the money. It's not a good business, it's difficult to make money. But if you're just putting your salary to the account and bank can sell this money for 5% per annum, they can make much more money, even not providing any credit to the economics, just selling this money to the central bank. And this will happen for sure for the industry, because the interest rates for sure will be higher than now, and they also the European Central Bank governor is talking about that. It's a question. It's a matter of time when they will become positive, but they will come positive this year for sure. And the banks become even more profitable with each step of growing the rate. They could be able to make more money on customers' funds. And in general, inflation is a very good time, especially for financial institutions, to make money. And also we can see that after the recent correction, we have between the fundamentally fair price of the industry and the actual price, market price of the industry, this difference between fundamental target and fundamental valuation and current market prices also, this difference is one of the best in the last many years. And the second way, in my standpoint, investing into financial sector in the United States and Europe, it's almost the same. Even to the big banks like Deutsche Bank and such big Commerzbank, such big institution, could be a good idea because it's cheap enough and they are very close to the time when they can be able to make much more money than before. and they will it will prevent them from transformation. In the end of the day, they big institution, they will make some money on this inflation, and then they will face a much stronger competition from fintech companies and will go out from the market for anyway. But with this huge help of inflation, they still could be able to make their revenue declines many times, but now they can hike, maybe to decline again after some time. But that could be a great moment to buy it now and sell in a couple of years. So it's also a good time for industry, to many manufacturers all over the world. Now they have one of the best, at this moment they have a very interesting opportunity to buy a lot of manufacturers right now. They able to invest to growth of their production with very cheap money. They can do a huge capex and do the large capital expenditures with a very cheap financing. And the cost of the goods which they produce will continue to grow with inflation. And it will be very easy to them to repay this debt. It's also could be a very interesting opportunity in white industry itself. So you can take this exposure buying ETFs like XLI. It's also happening the same. The price target on a high level, the market price in the lowest level since pandemic time, and forward PE also on the lowest level because the revenues continue to grow, and that's a just update. That's information that they published a new numbers in their reports. But now an average payback in a fund is like 19 years comparable to 29 years just recently in April of 2021. This also could be very interesting opportunity. I'm sure that their revenue could be even higher than now because of inflation. Basic materials. No, I think all of you who is paying the gas bills, energy bills, can see that we are, I think, we are already inside new basic materials super cycle when energy price is beating records. Also because of this war, but not only because of that, because economics has started to recover. It's huge amounts of money in the market and some deficit with supply, also with energy supply after pandemic. So industrial production level is starting to recover, but energy supply is not enough to cover it. And of course, this war is getting this problem is even worse. So the energy is cost, it's record cost. Metals and all the mining industry, all the metals like nickel, copper, gold, all the mining industries also has a very good tailwind because their capital expenditures is still financing very cheap, but the metals and energies is cost the record high. So their shareholders this time is making much more money than before. We also can see how their upside is continue to grow and how we can see some kind of stagnation since 2021. And we can see how earnings per share is continue to grow and how cheaper this industry is coming. So it's not declining. The CTF is trading more or less stable, but its fair value is continue to rise with the corporate profits. And I hope that the corporate profits can grow faster than expected, also because of this, because the price, no analyst expected such high price for natural gas, for oil, for heating oil, even for wheat, for some food. It's also record price for the most of the food in the country, in the world. Healthcare, I think healthcare is one of the most sustainable trends even before pandemic. They accelerated in the pandemic time, but people is getting older all over the world. The average age of the people in the world is getting older, and especially in developed countries, the average age of a person is getting significantly older. And when you rich enough, old enough, you're starting to spend most of your wealth to keep your health, to invest into your health. And that's a big trend which is continue to grow. It's significantly accelerated through pandemic time. But I think, and I'm sure that it has still a room it still has a room for growth, and maybe just looking for the fundamental price of the sector, and comparing to this difference between market price and fundamental price, also indicating that it's already a good point to enter the market. That's about ETF of XLV. That's a healthcare ETF in the United States. Consumer staples, I think it's also very interesting industry, and we can see dynamic of its price, price targets, how price targets is growing and how their revenue is growing. We can see inflation in all of these charts because they making much more dollars per share than before on average. All the industry is making more than before. That's how the inflation is working, because the revenue of all the market is becoming bigger. It's not always amount of goods produced getting bigger, but revenue sometimes just because of price increase. But maybe it's also interesting opportunity, because sometimes when we have this correlation, when the market price is going down and the fundamental prices continue to grow, sometimes it's then accelerating to get back to the trend. So nobody can predict the reversal point, some point of turnaround, the point when, so especially today, let's buy the stock, it will be the lowest point. Of course, no any analyst can predict that, but we just can make assumptions that the price is good enough to buy it now. Maybe it will be even cheaper, who knows, but it's good enough for anyway. On the long term, we will be, if we are buying stock for reasonable price, if we're buying stock with good fundamental value, this value will be discovered. It can take a time, but it will be discovered. Sorry. One of the most damaged sector, the sector of software and biotech, that was the most popular companies for IPO in 2020 and 2021. A lot of them more than doubled after IPO. Many of them tripled after IPO in just some months, in 3 months or something like that. we've seen extremely high amount of success stories in 2021 and 2020 after in April. It was a huge growth. If we will see from 2015 the growth of cloud computing index. So these companies created a lot of value to their shareholders because they and their revenue of the sector is also growing fast enough. Not only the price of these companies. We can see a lot of companies who have that 3 times less revenue just 2 years ago, and it's many of them. So all of them doubling their revenue year over year, 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, 400 million, billion and a half, 2 billion, 3 billions. We see a lot of the stories because it's like that's like our product of digital mortgage. We started to provide a digital mortgage in Kazakhstan just less than a year in the last summer, and we became a mortgage bank #1 just with technology, without branches, without price dumping, without huge marketing expenses. We became a process which already took like 1 month on average in the best cases in different banks. We created technology which allow us to do that during a day. If you do something in a day which most of your competitors do in months, you can take the market fast enough until they could be able to repeat you and create the same kind of product. You can disrupt their market share. So we've been a zero bank in mortgage last year, and now we're issuing most of the mortgage in the country. That's how technology can disrupt everything, either in such conservative market. Because in Kazakhstan, you no need to visit any branch of any bank to get the mortgage, and you no need to provide any papers. We just need to do the biometric authentication and get your permission to access some data from the government database, to do all the background checks, credit checks, property checks, buyer and seller. With all this permission, we can collect all this information, not requesting it from you, and not issuing any paper documents out of this process. A lot of these companies doing the same, and they also creating some revolutionary in their sectors. That's also one of the reasons why IPO market and all this venture market is booming. Sometimes American Silicon Valley is creating a lot of shit, but sometimes they creating real treasuries, and the profits from these treasuries is covering all the losses on very stupid startups. Biotech is also having a stronger decline than pandemic. So we've seen in pandemic this cloud computing decline at almost the same way like now. It's the same kind of decline. In terms from standpoint of cloud computing, we got back almost to the pre-pandemic time. And a lot of companies having much bigger revenue now and cost like before pandemic. Many of them is still overvalued, but many of them looks very undervalued now. What is happening on European stock market? We've seen a huge inflow of cash in American market. So a lot of investors brought the cash into the equity funds in the United States. The cumulative flow was more than 10% of total assets. In a year, it's big for developed market. And in Europe, unfortunately, we don't see this trend. So many money being printed, and almost none of them came to the European stock market, which is also strange enough. Unfortunately, Europe is meeting the same problems of inflation like the United States, because Europe coordinated its policy. It's also provided big relief, monetary relief in COVID time. It's issued a lot of cash, some trillions of euro being provided as a fiscal stimulus to many people living in the European Union, distributed between all the countries. But and we having this inflation also because of that, because we just printed some trillions and economics not grown such fast to absorb all this money, extra money supply. But especially this time, it's meaning only one. So maybe European investors directing most of this money to the United States, but that's not completely true. Because European euro is not declining much against US dollar. It's being more or less stable. Last couple of years, the exchange rate between US dollars. So some European investors is transferring funds, but not so much. It's not so much volatility in exchange rate between the European euro and US dollars. But that means that European stock market looks underfunded at this moment. In Europe, risking a bit more than US, because in the United States, it's much bigger part of the national wealth is the stocks, which more protected from inflation. In European Union, most of the wealth is still located into the debt instruments, in the bonds, which is more conservative on the one hand, but on another hand, that will mean that European big businesses and financial institutions will make much more money on this crisis rather than normal folks, rather than individual investors. And in the end of the crisis, people in Europe the wealth in Europe will be distributed even less fair than now. And wealth in the United States will be distributed a bit better. So the more the pensions will be more protected in the United States because of their bigger exposure to the stock market. I think that's my key points which I want to highlight now, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. I know that we have, I will give you a microphone. How to better do that?
So we can go forward for the questions, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Bernd Südow. One question to the interest rates. Do you think it will be for a short time or a longer time?
I hope that European Central Bank, as well as Federal Reserve, is not wrong in their assumption, and they expect inflation to grow for a short period of time and then decline without any stimulus. I think that could be true in some ways, but because, for example, the price of used cars in the United States grown to like 30%. It's one of the biggest component on deficit of new cars. And of course, car supply should grow. People all the countries is recovering from pandemic. This supply chains is starting to recover. but that's not for sure, because China is it looks like China is going through pandemic just now because of their very strict measures and very strict regime in the very beginning. Very few Chinese people gone through the pandemic, and they just going through it now. And that's also extra risk for example, for just their supply recovery. So supply recovery also could not happen such fast as we wish. Of course, most of fiscal stimulus already spent. So people took the checks, they spent this money, and they not even have any more money to spend. It also should help to lower the inflation. And inflation should not be on such high level for a long time, like 8%, 8%. They expect them the price to get back soon enough. But inflation is very difficult to provoke if we have a very long story of stability in a price. You can print money very long time and nothing reacting. Like we did it since 2008. So European Union, through many programs, European Central Bank provided a huge amount of new money to the banks to support economic growth, to support growth of the credit, to support the economic growth, all the things. And we see no inflation, just printing and no inflation. And then when it's appearing, it's very difficult to calm it down. Because if the people seen how price increasing, they starting to expect it to continue. And when they're expecting it to continue, it's very difficult to change their minds. And that's a challenge. I think monetary regulators could not be able to react fast enough and calm it down soon enough. So the inflation will slower in the future, but not slower enough. But monetary regulators could not be able to raise the interest rate high enough to help them to slow. And because of that, we will receive the situation of relatively high inflation. Maybe not such high like now, but not such low as they wish. And all of them could create a risk of decreasing price of the bonds. The European Central Bank could not be able to hike the rate to 6% because of the risk of bond decline. So if they will really do that now, it will create a huge risk to reevaluation of all bonds on banks' balance sheet. It's multi-trillions and potential damage to the equity of commercial banks, which is also not suitable to the pension funds, to the insurance companies. And for many reasons, regulators could not be able to afford that. And maybe also because of that, we will see a higher inflation longer, because looks like it's a better compromise. It's nothing good on high inflation. Especially poor people suffer on high inflation much more than rich people. But unfortunately, it looks like we don't have a big choice. And they will continue to do something, but not enough to control. Inflation will be lower, but not low enough. And all this, many of these theses will continue to work because of that.
Thanks. I have one question to your assumption that you say, okay, if inflation increase sales in the corporates and the enterprises, that this is not really affecting the stock itself, because inflation and sales is, like, for your assumption, connected to each other. Is this right? So, and my actual question is, based on this assumption, would you invest only in US stocks or in European stocks and US stocks?
Of course, inflation could be different. It can, but in general, when inflation is high enough, all kind of prices will grow. And in this case, it should it should support the growth of the revenue for most of the companies. And yes, many European companies looks undervalued comparable to US companies. And in this case, we expect to allocate some money into European stocks also. They also looks attractive enough now. That's a bit more challenging for us because we historically we had a better expertise on US market and a bit less expertise in European market, but we're growing this expertise especially now, and I hope that I'm personally as investor will put some selections from European stocks to my portfolio because it also should help to protect any savings in euro from this also inflation risk. It is some industries which is government regulated who can not be able to react to inflation, and of course you should avoid this kind of stocks. Many utilities companies, for example, cannot benefit out of that because many utilities companies could be in a situation of government price regulation, and the government will not allow them to increase price, and they can become less attractive. But in the industries of the less regulated, high competitive, many of these industries should benefit much more from this situation. So not all the stocks will be equal.
May I ask in Russian? Мы сейчас наблюдаем очень сильную коррекцию, в то же время волатильность большая. Когда можно ожидать улучшения на рынке?
I think I should talk in English because most of the people will not understand. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to speculate when this volatility will decrease, when the market will turn around. I hope we see many signs that it can happen soon enough. But it's most impossible to predict the turnaround point. The volatility, yes, it's extremely high, and fear level is extremely high. The demand for insurance in the market, demand for put options, for example, is also extremely high. So the people now paying much higher insurance premiums to protect their portfolio from this line rather than any moment before, for many months back. At least we are in the pandemic time this time, based on fear level. And usually the highest fear level always means a turnaround point. When the people is ready to pay a huge premium to insure their risk, that means that it's nothing to insure really. And when this price of insurance is getting extremely low, that usually means that it's another turnaround is soon enough. But people is irrational. They paying for insurance when almost all the bad things has happened. And because of that, most insurance companies is getting most of the money, not in the time when everything is good, but in the time when the most of catastrophes already happened. And especially this time, the demand for insurance is extremely high. But the next catastrophe will happen not soon enough.
Yeah.
As you said in the presentation, that the energy supply is getting lower, and also the prices for gas and for other commodities are getting higher. And also the problem is getting into the supply chain because of the disrupted processes that happened during because of the war and because of a lot of other problems. And the issue here is that the production lines are going to produce less products, and they're going to produce less cash flow, of course, so because we have less products, so less money are being produced. And what stockholders would like to see from their companies, that they're selling more and more. And what we see now, that they might sell even less than they sell right now due to those processes that I described before. So why don't you think that that could be the problem that will turn the stocks to the deeper correction? Thank you.
In a situation where we have a lot of money which is seeking for some which is demanding more goods, and we have problems with goods production, in a normal market economics, that will mean that the price for these goods will be higher, and prices also is very sticky. If you've been able to sell your goods 20% higher than before, for example, because of strong deficit, and this price increase being supported by the cash availability, because people have enough of cash to pay even more than before. Even when you will recover your supply chain, the price still will be high enough, and you will be compensated. You will lose some 20% of production, but it will be fully covered by growth of the price. But when your production will recover because of reconstruction of supply chain, you could be able to make even much more than before. Of course, the risk which you highlighted exists. It can happen this way also, and you should be very selective in industries and understand, could it be even possible to increase the price, or maybe not. Maybe especially in this industry, by many reasons, it will be impossible, and the company just lose the revenue, and its fair value should be less. And let's check how expensive is this business. Maybe it's now traded half less than before, and it still has a chance to recover fast enough. But maybe it's still traded the same price, but just generating less money, and it's we need to sell the stock because it's overvalued. But for many stocks, they could be able to keep their revenue by just increasing the price, and later they could be able to generate more recovering supply chain.
Okay. We have here a kind of queue already, so take care of everybody.
Здравствуйте, я воспользуюсь прецедентом и задам на русском. Хорошо вопрос. Мы говорим о том, что сейчас очень много денег, да, и нужно куда-то инвестить. Вот вы как инвестор, в какие реальные секторы экономики сейчас лучше всего инвестить? И вообще, как выйти из этого водоворота, скажем так, и разницы между большим кэшом и куда все-таки инвестировать?
Нет, не слышу.
So the question was, what's the preferred sectors of real economics in which we can invest the excess cash which we have now in the world. I think the main answer to this question, it's much better to invest in the sector which you better understand. If you're understanding better, especially healthcare sector, because you are a healthcare professional, it's much better to allocate money in this sector because you have a better expertise and better chances to realize how competitive is a potential target for your investment. And also, if you're doing some kind of private equity investments or you're investing in your own business, it's always better to invest any sector which you know better, because of course any tech is growing faster than old-fashioned companies in any sectors. It could be health tech, insurtech, fintech, any tech in any in any sphere, either in automobile industry, and Tesla is also kind of this tech, because they having a very interesting approach in many their processes. They rebuilt the car distribution model. They're selling all the cars online, for example. And their productivity is also on a very high level. They have a very much automatization in production of cars, in production of batteries, and all of these things. So I am trying to invest. If to tell about stock market, I built a portfolio just last week. First time in more than 7 years, I think. I've been out of holdings of anything. I've been fully focused my own business. I still wants to be. But last week I just built a long-term portfolio for not significant share of my cash, but I'm not have a lot of cash at all. So my key source of wealth is my own stock, is my business which I'm owning now. And that's not a cash which I could invest. But as a private person, I built a portfolio. You can find this portfolio on TraderNet. It's mostly on software companies. On the last sector which I showed you, this here. That's sorry, big tech. So this recent IPOs, computing sectors, cloud computing index, these things. I collected a portfolio out of 12 stocks. I think it's a good point to collect some selections from the recent IPOs who've been under a huge pressure last 6 months, and they have a great potential to recover in the next couple of years. I hope that I could be able to double my money. Many of these stocks lost more than 70% of their cost. So if they will recover at half, that will mean almost a doubling of money. And I hope that many of them really has this potential to recover. In my business, I'm continuing to be dedicated to financial sector and to telecom, because the main thing in economics is a cell phone. You start the day with it. You're making most of your financial transaction with your cell phone. You're buying most of the goods. So you do most of you already do a lot of your job with your cell phone. So that's the key instrument. That's the key commercial real estate. It's also inside your cell phone. So we're trying to be dedicated to fintech, to financial sector, to some cell phone related services, which we understand a bit better. And we are trying to invest most of our free cash to this in the countries where we're doing some business, in the industry which we are understanding better than another. I'm really hope that your dedication to your to the sector where you have the most of knowledge is the most important thing. Even if the another sector has a better potential, it's still a lot of when you're buying some stocks, you taking these risks, not the bank, not the investment bank, not the broker. Especially you taking this risk. It's all your risk and it's all your potential profits. You can double your money, you can lose all your money. And it's much better to be more confident in the sector and in the company which you are buying. It's better to understand their business model. That helps you to go through the crisis, through many crises without losing this confidence. Because if you just bought Bitcoin because everyone buying, it will be very difficult not to lose money on it. If you are buying something because you are understanding why, it will be much more chances to keep to sell this asset with a profit, and to be able to not to sell in a bad moment when you will be under the pressure. If you will always start to buy when everyone buying and will start to sell when everybody is selling, you will lose money for sure.
Edward from Cameroon. I have a question, but I also had some 3 questions which I wanted to ask you before. First of all, I must congratulate you for the work you are doing with your team. I read everything for the past 3 years, and it is extremely quality, I must confess to you. My question on that section was that what are the 3 things as a leader can you advise us going? And secondly, I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with pressure? Because the Freedom Finance is facing competition from other sections. How do you, as a leader, deal with the pressure, both in the public and private? And the last question, which I will divide in 2, you talk about US stocks are more protected, and you just mentioned that the European stocks are undervalued. What do you recommend? You have mentioned that we go into the section which we understand better. What is your instinct and advice for us? Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting.
I think one of the most important thing for a leader to create a confidence inside your team. So your team should be confident in you, and you should be confident with your team. You have to work with the people, with your top management, and the same way like you wish your salesperson will deal with an end customer. You should keep integrity inside your team. You never could be different. If you allowing yourself not to fulfill your obligation, so nobody in your company will fulfill. You should remember that we can't be very different. So your commitment to the work, your commitment to fulfill your obligation, your ability to trust people will be a culture of all organization, and it's very important. This moment, the competition is winning by the company with a high level of confidence inside, with the companies who is able to trust each other, with the companies who can afford and allow its team to take a risk and to make mistakes, and still to be able to share all their findings, information, and all of them to the companies with not much dictatorship style in their in a management. So you have to sell all the decisions, not just to put some orders. You have to do something. You have to explain and you have to sell the general idea why your employees, why your staff have to do something. And if they understanding well enough why you are asking them to do something, they can be better involved and they can produce a much better result. If your people is not understanding why are you asking them to do something, it's always bad. And even if they not agree with you and you just forcing them to do something, it's always a bad idea. If you have a very strong confidence level, And if you build a strong confidence in your team, sometimes you can just ask and use your some of your virtual points to force people to do something without explanation. Just do it because I told. If you have a strong confidence level, time to time you can also do that, and people will trust you that you know what is better and what is not. But if you're doing that too frequently, you're starting to lose the confidence, and it's better to not to do it. It's better not to do it frequently. Sometimes in a crisis time, you have to just ask your people to do. But as a leader, you also should communicate as much as you can, especially in the tough times. When everything is going good, you can be silent. But in the tough times, you have to talk to your people, to your partners, to your customers, especially when you don't like to do that. Especially in a time when you could be able to ask very difficult questions. It's always better to talk than not to talk. It's always better to answer questions rather than not to answer. In my world, at least. Maybe it's not for all the people. The last question being about the difference between US stocks and European stocks. US stocks is better than US dollars and better than US bonds. It's not better than European stocks. It's not necessarily better than European stocks. I think US just a better marketplace. It's a more investment opportunities in the United States. If you are able to find a very interesting company, a very interesting investment opportunity in Europe, and you understanding it's better, do it in Europe, of course, just because you're understanding it better. But United States market could be interesting just because it's a much bigger marketplace where you can observe much more opportunities. And can you just remember your second question, because I think I forgot it. I'm not sure that US stock especially more protecting than European stocks. It's more protecting rather than US bonds, for example. And the European stocks looks at least on the first sight as undervalued rather than US stocks. But let's deep down. Let's dive a bit down, a bit deeper, and check if we will be able to find an interesting opportunities here in Europe. Let's do that. It's US stocks not especially more confident rather than European.
Wir hatten da den Herrn schon, dann komme ich dann zu Ihnen.
Thank you so much for your speech, for your market view. A couple of years ago, the Freedom Finance launched the mutual fund of initial public offerings, and it really demonstrated good result and good money return. But over the last several months, this fund lost significantly, about 80%, and currently it trades about 40% discount compared to the market value. Yeah. Could you please explain what is going on and how Freedom Finance is going to handle with it? And my second question would be about Chinese tech stocks. As you mentioned that US tech stocks seems undervalued, and Chinese tech stocks seems even more undervalued. What do you think about it?
two problems of our closed-end funds specialized on IPO is based on two problems. The first problem, the fund is fixed by its, it cannot be reduced when a lot of good IPO happens. We're seeing big, so a lot of new people is coming to the fund, and it's not so easy to make it bigger, but it's even by regulatory reason, it's even much more difficult to decrease the fund, because it's fund creating for the long term, and if you wish to remove some assets out of closed-end fund, you have to go through a very complicated corporate process. So you can't just buy some you can't just buy some shares of this fund back to the fund. So we are buying all the supply as a market maker, not fund itself. Unfortunately, by regulatory reason, this form of fund is enabled to buy back its own stock. We've been a market maker all this time, trying to provide liquidity to be able to buy back this investment. But the second problem why this difference between net asset value and market price becomes such big is the problem on Russian stock market, because the fund been incorporated in Russia, and now Russia, our market maker is non-resident of Russia, and we are trying to use money. We are trying to borrow money against with collateral of US stocks. So we have to borrow money to buy back these shares, and we're securing these borrowings by US stocks, and now it's prohibited in Russia. And it's either prohibited for non-resident of Russia to trade in the Russian market. So because of all of that, we lost most of our ability to support the price of this fund. And many people looking for a decline in a sector. It's still a lot of supply of this stock. So many people want to sell, very few of them wants to buy, and that's because this discount is rising. We still buying every day, less than before, but we're still buying. We are almost the only buyer in the market. If someone is selling, we are buying. And we are buying, we still continue to buy every day. We are trying to use the different companies. We are trying to create different schemes. We are borrowing money for a very huge price to buy back the stock. But I'm completely sure when this new IPO season will restart, and we will see some increase in net asset value, because the net asset value like $20 per share, which is also not big amounts of money. But if we will see new IPO season and the new IPO will start to show the better performance, it can start repricing of all the holdings of the fund. And if the net asset value will start to grow, first time in the last 9 months, I hope that a lot of investors could be interested to play back this decline, and this difference of this deficit can flip fast enough back to premium to net asset value. And it also can happen very, very, very soon when the market will turn around. But unfortunately, the key problem of this fund is that the fund itself can't buy back its shares. That's because the premium can happen and also discount can happen. We are trying to trade, we are trying to buy it with this discount and sell it with a premium, but unfortunately we are staying alone against all the market. And we also bought back almost half of the fund, which is a huge amount of money, supporting this net asset value and market making this fund. But especially in this, we have to transfer, I think in the nearest future, we have to transfer this fund out of Russian jurisdiction at least, because it's enabled to manage this fund and even trade this stock on the Russian market. We will transfer it to Astana International Financial Center, different jurisdiction, and it should solve all the problem. And I think it's also will help us moving to the different regulation. It will help us to better manage net asset value of this fund. So I hope this discount problem also could be solved. We have an opportunity now, for example, to seize the fund itself. If we will seize this fund, we will close it down completely. You will get a net asset value which is much higher than now, but you will not be able to take a chance to make some money on recovering of this fund. It could not be seized in a part, so we can't seize it in a half, unfortunately. We just can't seize it completely, but that's not in the best interest of most of our customers, especially in Russia, who will not be even able to sell the stock from this fund. That also could be a problem. So I hope that now it's a really very bad idea to sell all the stock out of fund, because many of them looks extremely undervalued. So it's much better to just wait, and I hope that the stock, that the fund, which is still plus 60% since incorporation. So we incorporated it in 2020, and it's still plus 60% from the day of incorporation. But yes, it's lost like 70% from the top in 2021. And all the IPO sector also lost a half. Fund lost more than IPO sector because of this difference in net asset value, but not significantly higher. Unfortunately, the Renaissance Fund incorporated in the United States, which is ETF and much easily traded, but they not really buying stocks on IPO price. And that also was the reason why they performed worse before, but performing a bit better now. They don't have a difference between net asset value, but they also lost more than half of net asset value just because of correction. So I hope that it could be very interesting opportunity, because buying this fund, which is nobody likes to do now, you're able to buy a cheap stock even with 40% discount to the current market value. So we continue to do that, but unfortunately we can't put another 100 million to the fund, our own funds, market maker funds, to support the fund. And it's very difficult to do arbitrage, because when we're buying the fund, we have to short stocks on a different way. Otherwise, we will take a so huge market risk to the market maker. So market maker can't afford 100 million position, because if the market still decline another half, for example, we will lose 50 million. So we don't have so much capital to lose. We can't buy all the risk of all our customers back. And we don't have an instruments to do that in the right way, just to sell back to the market. So sorry for such long question, especially for this product. Yeah, right. Thank you. It's very difficult to answer 2 questions. I'm forgetting another one. I'm not extremely optimistic about Chinese stocks. They undervalued as well as the United States. That's true. They even more undervalued Russia than US stocks. That's also true. But unfortunately, China is not the United States, and they like to remember us that the Chinese is still ruled by Communist Party. And they have a little bit different legal system and political system inside the country. It's still a country with a closed capital account with not freely convertible currency. So yuan is not fully convertible currency. It is offshore yuan, onshore yuan, and it's difference in between. You can't just convert any amount of yuan on the exchange for US dollars. It is a capital restriction in China. They always been in the market. It's a lot of restriction which is not allowing foreigners to own Chinese corporation. And all the Chinese companies in the United States is viable interest entities. So you're owning not the stock of Chinese companies, you're owning interest in offshore company which is obligated to transit the net income of Chinese company back to US shareholders, which is also not directly the same like owning the stock directly. It is some risk, so Chinese government any moment can just restrict any payments to the foreigners, for example, and it's very simple to do. They have a very, they're regulating markets, not exactly the same way like the United States or European Union. They have a different political culture of business regulation. In the United States, you just can't make some decision because they have their Senate, they have a president, they have independent judges, independent press, and all of them can try to allow the United States to be predictable even if Trump is president. But in China, it's not works the same way. And it's always requires some discount because of that. And all these cases with the Didi, with their prohibition of education, paying for education and something, all the scandals last years, that's a small remembering that the China is not exactly US. It's a little bit different. So, but it's, of course, it is still a lot of opportunities, and Chinese companies looks even cheaper than US. But they a bit cheaper than US also because of some reasons. And you have to remember all these reasons. But I'm sure that if the United States sector will start to recover, Chinese will also try to do the same.
Добрый вечер. Могу я попросить записать мой вопрос и ваш ответ? Спасибо. Игорь Жижич, являюсь представителем Европейского клуба предпринимателей среднекрупного бизнеса «Бизон» в Европе. У нас на инвестиционном форуме уже активно последних полгода обсуждается вопрос переливания инвестиций из акций классических, там, IPO и так далее, в криптовалюту. Понятно, что сейчас штормит все рынки и так далее. Вот я бы хотел попросить, чтобы вы как-то вот для нас ответили, что вы по этому поводу думаете и какие, может быть, там рекомендации, либо еще что-то могли бы посоветовать. Спасибо.
По-русски лучше? Давайте попробую. Let me to speak briefly in Russia to answer the question for their club, and I will try to summarize in English later. Смотрите, единственная причина, почему американский рынок рос последние 200 лет, потому что компании, чьи акции торговались на этом рынке, зарабатывали деньги для своих акционеров и создавали какую-то ценность. Единственная причина, почему компании платят проценты по своим долгам, и эти проценты оказываются больше, чем инфляция, опять же, потому что они создают какую-то ценность для своих акционеров, и это очень важно. Существует только существует два фундаментальных вида инвестиционных активов, да, то есть чего-то, во что можно вкладывать деньги. Но есть деньги itself, есть сами по себе деньги, как средство платежа, не как то, во что можно инвестировать. Есть что-то, куда можно вкладывать деньги, производные от них. Это либо долг, либо доля. И для того, чтобы устойчиво и sustainable у тебя была возможность зарабатывать деньги на этом, чтобы твои акции росли из года в год, и росли быстрее, чем растет инфляция, для того, чтобы компании могли платить проценты и платить их больше, чем, опять же, идет инфляция, они должны создавать какую-то ценность обязательно. В противном случае она может надуться и сдуться там, до любых размеров, на самом деле волатильность может быть любая. Все может подорожать в 350 тысяч раз, а потом также подешеветь обратно. но всегда у тебя за любым созданием стоимости долгосрочно всегда стоит какой-то прибыльный бизнес, какой-то процесс создания ценности для конечного клиента. И в эпоху криптомира, ну, на мой взгляд, там есть очень большие проблемы с созданием ценности самой. Основная масса историй, они вообще никакой ценности не создают и средством платежа, в общем-то, тоже не являются. Есть разные ниши, которые они пытаются занимать, но они имеют очень много таких очень специфичных проблем, которые одной технологией не решить. Как стейблкоины, те же самые, которые стали очень популярны, потому что стали, по сути, аналогом секретных аккаунтов в Швейцарии в какой-то момент времени. Но это не вопрос технологии как таковой, это вопрос, о чем люди договорятся. Приемлемы ли секретные аккаунты в современном мире или нет? Если они приемлемы, то, очевидно, можно и Швейцарию обратно открывать. И выяснится, что они будут конкурировать с этим. Если они неприемлемы, то и стейблкоины надо запретить, либо сделать их, либо лишить их той анонимности, которую они сейчас во многом имеют. И это тоже может быть большой угрозой, потому что очень многие их покупают именно для этого сейчас, как некий способ защитить себя от государства в какой-то мере. Если говорить о многих криптокарренси, которые work-proof, что называется, когда тебе нужно делать очень много бессмысленных вычислений, чтобы доказать, что у тебя есть эти вычислительные мощности, и ты имеешь право подписывать эти транзакции, то, на мой взгляд, это очень дорогой способ подписывать эти транзакции. Это очень дорогой способ для того, чтобы проводить платежи. Если мы говорим о том, что, опять же, это способ обмануть регулирование и избежать комплайенса, KYC, всех процессов, которые связаны с расчетами, то, на мой взгляд, это тоже вопрос общественного договора. Если мы считаем, что такие платежи возможно делать без комплайенса, то надо разрешить банкам это делать. Если мы не считаем, что это возможно и приемлемо, то регуляторы рано или поздно запретят и криминализуют в любом случае и такие расчеты тоже. Здесь можно сделать assumption о том, что они не смогут это запретить просто никак. Это интересная история, но пока использовать фактически work-proof валюты для расчетов сами по себе почти невозможно. У тебя кост транзакции очень высокий, ты должен буквально несколько долларов зачастую за транзакцию платить, и она занимает там, ну не знаю, я помню, я пытался сделать какую-то тестовую транзакцию там буквально месяц назад, она у меня шла 32 или 36 минут, ну как-то достаточно долго, неприлично долго для того, чтобы ты мог делать операции. Безусловно, наверное, то есть есть концепция частных валют. По большому счету это сток, это и есть акции. Ты выпускаешь акции, они торгуются на бирже, их цена меняется, и их стоимость зависит от того, насколько много ценностей создает твоя компания, которая работает. И дальше ты можешь ей платить бонусы, покупать за эти акции компании, использовать ее как валюту. Ну, то есть как бы концепция частных валют, она тоже достаточно развита, и я думаю, что она будет дальше развиваться. Но, повторюсь, сущностей не так много, это либо валюта, но валюту тоже можно оценить. Сколько должно стоить евро, например, к доллару? Мы считаем размер экономики, которую эта валюта обслуживает, размер инвестиций, которые эта валюта обслуживает, сколько товаров и услуг, сколько транзакций происходит, сколько ценностей Европейский Союз создает, насколько Соединенные Штаты, сколько валют выпущено тут, сколько выпущено там, и какой между ними должен быть курс в зависимости от их взаимной торговли и многих других вещей. Но к большинстве криптовалют нельзя подойти как к валютам, потому что никакую экономику вообще не обслуживают. Ну, то есть или размер экономики, который они обслуживают, он очень маленький. Ну, там, не знаю, какой-нибудь Darknet, какие-то виды расчетов, они существуют, безусловно. Но если в стандартном режиме подходить к этому, то они все равно выглядят очень переоцененными. И я думаю, что самому криптомиру нужно будет достаточно сильно измениться, прежде чем он станет устойчивым. То есть я не исключаю того, что здесь есть будущее, но я пока не понимаю, ну то есть мне кажется, что оно еще не наступило. То есть вот какая-то устойчивая структура не наступила, и очень большое количество криптоэнтузиастов, которые сейчас этим занимаются, они не, ну, то есть, знаешь, у меня было такое ощущение, что миллениалы придумали деньги. То есть огромное количество вопросов, которые люди пытались решить этим, про это написаны толстые книжки. Почему, например, это не получится? Эти книжки никто не читал. Есть огромное количество людей, которые придумывают новые деньги, ни черта не понимают, как устроены старые деньги. А это достаточно важно знать. И вот этот вот lack of knowledge, который у них есть, он меня немножко пугает и говорит о том, что очень много спроса совершенно нерационально здесь. И поэтому волатильность у актива тоже будет большая. А как будет меняться актив? Сможет он измениться так, чтобы, например, его ценность оказалась оправдана и даже была еще больше? Может быть, сможет. Он пока еще таким не стал, но у него, наверное, есть потенциал. Индустрия стала достаточно большой, чтобы не умереть. Но ей, чтобы выжить, надо будет точно измениться. И она пока еще точно не смогла этого сделать. А сможет или нет, мы посмотрим. Если сможет, то, очевидно, она анлочит еще больше ценности и будет стоить еще больше. Но если не сможет, очевидно, эта ценность может полностью утратить в какой-то момент времени. So, I will try to summarize my speech. The question being about the cryptocurrencies and about the potential shift in investments from traditional stocks and bonds to the cryptocurrency market. In my standpoint, it is only two kind of securities. That's the debt securities and equity securities. So the shares in property, shares in business, which is usually stock. There's three kind of financial assets: currency, security. Security could be equity security stock or bonds, some debt securities. For any security to be able to keep its value and produce a positive return to the customer, it should be some value in behind. So the US stock market growing last 200 years just because US corporations is creating value for their shareholders. So they're making money, they're distributing this money to investors, they're buying back their stock, they're paying dividends, so they're making money for their shareholders. That's the only reason why it's sustainably growing 200 years. And the return of the shareholders is bigger than inflation level. Any asset can cost any price. It can cost $1 and $1,000 in a year, but any sustainable growth should be supported by some value creating process in behind. So the business itself should be profitable and should generate some value to the shareholders and share this value to the shareholders by paying dividends, by reinvesting this money, by growing business, by buying back the stock, by something real. Otherwise, any bubble can be much smaller. Everything will go back to its fair value in a time. If it is a lot of fair value, sometimes we can unlock fair value, sometimes we can just lose all the capitalization because it's no fair value on behind. And the problem of the most crypto assets that it's not a stock, not a bond. It's a lot of assets don't have any value creation on behind, and because of that, their fair value is close to zero. Currencies itself is not stock and not a bond, but we also have many. We have many approaches how to value the currencies. Any financial analyst who is specialized on currency can understand how to find the fair value for European euro, for example, against US dollar. You can see the GDP in Eurozone, you can see the GDP in the United States, the size of economics, the amount of trade. You can see the inflation level, the money supply in the United States, the money supply in European Union, the trade deficit between these two countries, and the global trade deficit between the United States and all the world, between the Europe and all the world. And this difference can help us to find the right currency exchange rate. Sometimes this currency exchange rate can be overvalued, sometimes undervalued, but analyst can have some approach of potential fair value of this currency rate. Unfortunately, for example, work-proof currencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, most popular cryptocurrencies, they not servicing any significant economics, either black market. So they have some role in the payments, but payments is very slow and very expensive this moment. So you can wait up to an hour to proceed transaction. It will cost you some many euro. The cost of this transaction is much higher than a normal banking system. The problem of anonymity, for example, the problem of secrecy is not a problem of decentralized or centralized database. That's a problem of the general agreement between the people in a society. Do we like to have a secret accounts or not? If we like them to have, we can allow Swiss guys to do their job, and it works. They can work well. It's very popular service. But if you don't like them to do that, the stable coins will also not work like secret wallets with cash protected from government. That's not just technology questions. That's also some kind of political questions, because we can criminalize owning this currency as well as we criminalized Swiss banking secrecy in some time. But in back to this Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're not efficient enough to service most of transaction. And transaction in this in their blockchains is expensive, is really expensive, and we're not using it in day-to-day life. If we'll start to find the right exchange rate between US dollars and Bitcoin, it will be unfortunately much lower than now, because the amount, the size of economics serviced by Bitcoin is much less than US economics itself serviced by US dollars. And US dollars serving not only US economics, it's also serving in some way either European Union economics. Not so, okay, maybe it's not such popular in payments in European Union, but for example, in many countries, including China, it's very popular, extremely popular, especially in Kazakhstan, where I'm living. A lot of transactions happening with US dollar. It's from far outside from the United States, and it's so much of cash circulating outside of the United States in US dollars, as well as Bitcoin, of course. But this will start to compare the size of economics. It still will be very difficult. So I think the cryptocurrencies has a chance to become better, and if they will become more efficient and many of these problems will be solved, they can cost even much more than now. But they not yet solved all of this question. I'm not sure how exactly they should change, but that's a possible. They able to change, and they changing time to time. They getting better. I'm not sure they surely can become better. But if they will transform, this transformation and rising of their efficiency can maybe even support their price. But I'm not completely understanding what exactly they should do to solve all of the problems. And I'm understanding that the most of crypto enthusiasts who is dreaming much about the new brave world of new currency concept, decentralized finances. They never read books about money, about the nature of modern money, and I'm really suggesting them to read some books on monetary theory, because people in the last couple of centuries solved a lot of questions, and the current monetary system is like democracy. It's not efficient enough. It's not the best, but it's not they not completely efficient, but it's the best which we can have at this moment. It's not ideal, unfortunately, as all the people in the world, but as a democracy, it has a lot of bad side effects, but it's still best which we can have for this moment. It's not much easier to create a more a better society. Unfortunately, it's the same with the currency. And if when you have a force to change the world, it's better to understand well enough why the money became especially like it is now. Almost everywhere in the world, all the countries in the world have the same concept of money, almost the same concept. It's not because of any agreements after the Second World War or something like that. That's bullshit. Not because of that.
Fragen? Ja. Dann komme ich dann nochmal zu Ihnen.
Hello. Is it on? Working? Okay. Just one commentary to that, because you were talking about Bitcoin. Just wouldn't it make sense, because you showed all the graphs and all the increasing money supply, which is highly, how would I say, highly manipulative, and has been for decades. That it's time right now, because we're advancing technologically so fast, to have basically something as a currency that is not being manipulated by unelected bureaucrats sitting in the central banks, that is actually where actually inflation is non-existent. Because you're showing all the graphs, and you can look at the stock markets in Venezuela, for example. They have the same curve. That's just because the currency is valued at nothing, and it's just inflating so much. So you could just easily say, okay, just because the stocks are growing doesn't mean that the companies are getting more valuable, but actually just the money is getting cheaper. So this is why the curves are going up. And in Bitcoin, you have a maximum of 21 million ever to be created. And I think it's not even limited, it's fixed. Not even gold is fixed, because you can still find gold in the ocean and in space and all that. So I think, wouldn't it make sense to have something decentralized, where no inflation can actually happen? So that makes actually a much better way of transacting value between nations and people. That was my question.
Just maybe to put a mark, it's getting darker, so yes, we have only one last question, then after Timur answers this, and then only one, and then...
It's a perfect question. I love it. Unfortunately, we had a theory of fixed money supply, and it also has a lot of bad side effects itself, because amounts of money should not be fixed because of some reasons. Even in Middle Age Europe, when the most of banking system built on golden standard and metallic standard itself, with almost fixed money supply, it's grown, but most of the time it's grown slow enough. Amounts of money circulated in economics should not be the same all the time, because at least it's never the same, including the fixed concept, because the commercial banks itself can multiply the money. They can create a credit for any way. With fixed money supply or non-fixed money supply, if you have M0, your monetary base is fully stable, your banking system will start to take deposit, extend credit, and it will start to multiply money for anything. Because you as a depositor you having this money, and this money being provided to another person who is borrowing this money. And in economic growth, this credit is extending fast enough, and amounts of money is starting efficiently grow because money is circulating, credit is extending, and in the end of the day, in the end of the cycle, it's a lot of cheap credit. Credit is extending fast enough, and then we're meeting the credit crisis because we're meeting some overproduction. Population can grow, but it could be not enough money to pay goods and services. And price of the goods is starting to decline because the population is also growing. And economics is also getting more efficient. So for example, your parents had a 2 TV, you can have a 4 TV for the same price because productivity is rising. It takes less human efforts to create a new television. And if you not supporting this economic growth and population growth by growing of monetary supply, that will mean that in a moment it will be not enough of cash to grow, and it will also limit the economic growth. You want another TV, and on the second hand, the producer wants to produce, but all of you have not enough cash to do that because you don't have cash outstanding. For anyway, because we are unfortunately not exactly equal in our labor. Some of us is more efficient, some of us is less efficient. Is money starting to concentrate? It will also help in the concept of fixed money supply. Even like Bitcoin is concentrated now. If we have some market and some open economics, the wealth will start to concentrate. And it will be very difficult to reconcentrate and restart this economic. It could be possible only through bankruptcies. When you are putting, if you're not able to create a more production because you don't have enough of demand, people don't have enough of cash, you cannot be able to build another supply. And in this case, if you continue to produce and make money on that, you just continue to make money. You have no reason to reinvest this money because you don't have enough of supply. You're just concentrating your wealth. Your bank account is continuing to slowly grow time to time. And if you have a lot of frozen money, you're putting them to the bank. And okay, let's pay me some interest for this money because I can't use this money in my own business because it's no demands to support this any further investments. And bank will starting to extend credit, and this because of the cash deficit in economics, it's very difficult to repay this credit. And this redistribution is going through the bankruptcy and going through the very deep recession. Like Europe seen many times in the times of golden standard. It's been some decades of bankruptcies and economics decline. And we could lose like 25, 40 years when all the people spent most of their times bankrupting each other. Because you can't pay, you should go for bankruptcy, your property should be sold, and no one is buying because everyone is declining in the price. You bought a house, the next year houses cost cheaper. That's a very bad concept. Inflation is much better than these cyclic recessions when we're starting to bankrupt each other. And the best source of economic growth of the last 100 years, in the last 100 years we've seen a huge economic growth, much smoother and much faster than even before, is because of non-fixed money supply. Because the regulator could be able to control this money supply, to extend money in a time because the efficient amount of money in economics is not the only money supply. It's also the credit multiplier, and this multiplier can grow and can also decrease. And also the speed of circulation is also a very significant factor. If the money is circulating very fast, less money needed. If the circulation speed is lowering, it's more money needed to support the same. And you have to control all of this factor. Extending of credit. Sometimes you need to slow down your banking system and increase the interest rate to not to let extend too much credit to the economics, not to overwhelm the economics. And sometimes if your economics is lowering so fast, you have to provide a cheaper credit, even if, especially in a time when we're losing confidence. Especially the central banks is becoming the last line creditors, last resort creditors. When if people in the market losing confidence because it's a deficit of cash, as no one wants to provide the credit because they have a fear that the counterpart will not be able to fulfill their obligation because of the deficit of the cash. And the central bank is coming, especially this way, and trying to restart all the economics, extending cash to the lenders, buying back mortgages, buying back government bonds, providing extra cash to reduce these fears, to recover confidence. Because if we're losing confidence, the speed of circulation is lowering and credit extension is almost going to zero. And all of them can turn the growth, economic growth, back to recession, which is extremely much more painful rather than inflation. It is many problems in this concept of fixed money supply. So that's a reason why this concept of regulation is also have some potential problems. The current unlimited money printing also have some problems, and it's difficult to say what is worse. But inflation is also some kind of way to restart the economics, to deconcentrate the wealth. And we have only two ways to deconcentrate the wealth. It's an inflation, or that's a mass bankruptcy of the banks. If you put a lot of money to the bank, and bank is unable to collect the debt, we can just bankrupt the debt and cut off all the and let the creditors to lose their deposits. And it's much more painful rather than when you received your deposit back, but its purchasing power is lower. For people, if you deposit that €1,000 to the bank and get it back in 5 years, even if it's lost half of purchasing power, it's much less painful. It's not disrupting confidence like the moment when you put it get back only half with the same purchasing power, because you in a first way you're not starting to avoid the banks, and when you receive just a half back, you're losing confidence to the financial institution, and their ability to extend credit is very important for economic growth. So it's a very long story. let me stop.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, very appreciate this kind of interest, and I think we couldn't go on and on. But I would be now the bad guy who need, if there is now questions, to choose a question. Are there questions still there? Yes, and then we have done. Huh? Okay. Yeah, okay.
Many thanks for sharing with us your presentation. I want to hear your comments on changing of Federal Reserve policy. We know that starting from this summer, Federal Reserve will start to sell government bonds and mortgages to the market, to the already weak bond market. And many corporates during the time of cheap credit borrowed a lot of money. And now it will be very expensive to refinance them, which may cause selling assets to repaying debts. Yeah? And also this policy could, new tightening monetary policy could reduce the volume of cash available for the stocks. Could you please comment on this change of Fed policy and its impact to credit and stock market? Thank you.
The money supply increased so dramatically over the last couple of years that we have huge excess of reserves for financial institutions. It is a lot of money which is already locked in a central bank and they can't be used for anything. So they have not enough of assets to buy on this cash. And when they starting to reduce this, they printed a lot of cash in a time of low confidence in pandemic time, when the circulation speed of the money being lower, when all the fears of creditability being much higher. And now this credit multiplier is growing, which is efficiently increasing the available amounts of money. And the second way is the circulation speed is also growing, which is also increasing the efficient amounts of monetary supply. And they trying not to let inflation accelerate because the amount of available money is not decreasing, it's still increasing. Otherwise, if they're not printing, that not means that money supply is not growing. Because the credit multiplier is continue to extend the available amounts of money. It could be, sometimes it could be less than printed, sometimes it could be even more than printed. And their efforts to buy back to sell back some bonds which have been bought back, their efforts to rise in interest rates, for anyway is not enough. And the revenue of the corporations is growing much faster than their expenses to pay the debt, which been very cheaply acquired. So they have a debt financed with zero interest rate with the current inflation, and they pay nothing for their debt, and already their revenue is much higher. So this problem could be not such big as we expect, because their profit excess could be much bigger, and they could not be in a tough situation if the Federal Reserve will understand that they are selling back assets too fast and the monetary supply is becoming not enough to continue the normal economic growth. They will stop this policy. No, in other words, if they will see a market decline, which is also mean like tightening the general credit terms in economics. So even if monetary policy is tightening, it's not exactly meaning that the general credit terms is getting worse. Sometimes with the same interest rate, credit can grow and cannot grow. But if the Federal Reserve will see that it's not enough of money and it's a risk of recession because of the growing of interest rate, they will make decision not to do that, as they did it before when pandemic started. They grown the interest rate, and it will not big enough, and they lowered it very soon when they understood that it's a risk of economic decline. So it's much better to get inflation rather than the huge economic decline. That's also a reason if stock market will not continue to grow. They will not continue to raise interest rate because inflation is a problem, but not such a big problem like economic decline. So you should do anything to avoid a real decline in economics. Of course, hyperinflation is also the best way to get the real economic decline, because disrupting of all the savings in economics. But I hope they will be able to find the right way and the right balance between the economic growth and their ability to continue to do the business and service the debt. So their revenue should grow fast enough to let them cover the rising expenses for financing, because if financing expenses will start to grow faster than revenue, it will be a problem. But if their revenue will grow much faster than financing expenses, it also will be inflation problem. And they're trying to find solution between all of them. And I hope they could be able to find this teeny balance. Let's pray for them.
Thank you very much. You remember I started this meeting with my attention to the fact that the tremendous success of Freedom Finance, which back in the day, you remember I told you that I've been not sure, now I know it better, definitely better. And we talked about how relevant and tremendous important is the founder's vision of the development, the dedication, and by the way, the great Freedom Finance team. So now I hope you know what I'm talked about now. So thank you very much, and Timur, thank you very much as well. It was awesome. Thank you. So I think we have, please correct me